They say life can change in an instant, but Sarah Martinez never believed it until the night she saved the life of a stranger who wasn't a stranger at all. As a nurse in Chicago Memorial's emergency department, she'd seen thousands of patients come through those doors. Broken bones, heart attacks, overdoses, car accidents. Each face was a story. Each story was temporary. But some stories, she would learn, have a way of circling back when you least expect them, carrying secrets that can either destroy you or set you free. This is the story of one such night.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing.
The fluorescent lights of Chicago Memorial's emergency department hummed their familiar tune, casting everything in that sterile white glow that made 3 a.m. feel like purgatory. Sarah Martinez pulled her scrubs straight and checked her watch. 6 hours left on her shift. Outside, October rain drummed against the windows with the kind of persistence that suggested Mother Nature had personal grievances to settle. "Another lovely Chicago evening," muttered Dr. Rebecca Chen as she emerged from Trauma Bay 3, pulling off blooded gloves. At 38, Rebecca had the kind of composure that came from 15 years of emergency medicine, but tonight her usual calm seemed frayed around the edges. Sarah nodded, busy updating patient charts on her tablet. At 29, she'd been working nights for 3 years, ever since her divorce finalized, and she needed the night differential to support herself and her 7-year-old daughter, Emma. The graveyard shift suited her in ways she couldn't fully explain. There was something about the quiet desperation of the night hours that felt honest, stripped of the pretense that filled daylight hours. "How's Mrs. Patterson in bed 12?" Rebecca asked, settling beside Sarah at the nurse's station. "Stable. The blood thinners are working, but she's scared. Keeps asking about her husband." Sarah's fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency. "I told her he's parking the car, but we both know he's probably circling the block for the 5th time, working up the courage to come in." Rebecca smiled, the first genuine expression Sarah had seen from her all night. "You have a gift for reading people, you know that? Have you given any more thought to the nurse practitioner program?" "It's complicated," Sarah said, which was her standard response to most things that required hope. Before Rebecca could press further, the ambulance bay doors burst open with a crash that made both women look up. The paramedics rushed in, pushing a gurney, their faces grim beneath the harsh lights. "Male, mid-40s, found unconscious in his apartment by a neighbor," called out Jake Martinez, no relation despite the shared surname, though they joked about it countless times. "Possible MI, vitals are all over the place. He was down for unknown duration before we got there." Sarah watched the gurney roll past, catching a glimpse of the patient, a black man with graying temples and a face that seemed familiar in that vague way emergency room faces often did. Probably someone she'd seen in the neighborhood, or maybe he just had one of those faces that reminded you of someone else. "Trauma 2, Rebecca called out, already moving. "Sarah, you're with me." This was how it always went, the sudden shift from mundane to critical, from paperwork to life and death. Sarah loved his part of the job, the way it demanded everything from her and left no room for the worries that usually occupied her mind. When someone was dying, there was no space for thinking about overdue rent or Emma's upcoming school expenses or the loneliness that crept in during quiet moments. They wheeled the patient into Trauma Bay 2, and Sarah immediately began her assessment. The man was unconscious, his breathing shallow and labored. His skin had that grayish pallor that experienced nurses learned to recognize, the color of a body fighting for its life. "Let's get him on the monitors," Rebecca said, her voice shifting into the calm, authoritative tone she used during emergencies. "Sarah, start an IV, wide bore. We need to get some fluids into him and see what his blood work tells us." As Sarah worked to establish IV access, her eyes fell on the patient's personal effects that the paramedics had bagged. A wallet, keys, a cell phone with a cracked screen. The wallet had fallen open, revealing a driver's license. Sarah's hands froze. As she read the name, Marcus Thompson. The name hit her like a physical blow. Stealing the breath from her lungs, she stared at the driver's license, at the photo that showed the same face but 20 years younger, and felt the world tilt sideways. Marcus Thompson. Her father. Sarah, Rebecca's voice seemed to come from very far away. The IV? Sarah blinked, forcing herself back to the present. Her hands were shaking as she continued working, muscle memory overriding the chaos in her mind. She managed to get the IV started, her training overriding the chaos in her mind. 22 years. 22 years since Marcus Thompson had walked out of their small apartment in Pilsen, telling her mother he was going to buy cigarettes and never coming back. Sarah was 7 years old, the same age Emma was now. She'd waited by the window for 3 days, certain he would return, certain there had been some mistake. "Sarah," Rebecca's hand was on her shoulder. "You're pale. You okay?" Sarah realized she'd been staring at the patient, at her father, for too long. She looked up to find Rebecca's concerned eyes studying her face. "I'm fine," she managed, "just tired." But she wasn't fine. Nothing was fine about this. The man who had abandoned her and her mother, who had left them to struggle and scrape by, who had never sent as much as a birthday card or a phone call, was lying unconscious in front of her, depending on her to keep him alive. The irony was so sharp, it was almost funny. Almost. The foundation is shaken. Sarah's mysterious past collides with her present, but the real roller coaster is just beginning.
The next hour passed in a blur of medical procedures and internal turmoil. Sarah moved through her duties with robotic precision while her mind reeled. Every time she looked at Marcus Thompson's face, she saw fragments of memory. Him teaching her to ride a bike in the park. Him reading her bedtime stories in a voice that had seemed so safe and permanent. Him promising her he would always be there to protect her. All lies, apparently. Dr. Chen worked with her usual methodical approach, ordering tests and adjusting medications while Sarah tried to maintain her professional demeanor. The EKG showed clear signs of a massive heart attack, and Marcus's condition remained critical but stable. His blood work shows significant cardiac enzyme elevation, Rebecca said, studying the lab results. He's lucky someone found him when they did. Another hour and... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Lucky. The word felt obscene in this context. I want to keep him in the cardiac unit overnight for monitoring. Can you get him settled? I need to check on the multi-vehicle accident they're bringing in. Alone with Marcus, for the first time, Sarah found herself really looking at him. The years had not been kind. His hair was more gray than black now, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of hard living. His hands, which she remembered as strong and capable, looked thin and weathered. She noticed something else too, a small scar above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there when she was a child. She wondered how he'd gotten it, then hated herself for wondering. What did it matter? He'd forfeited the right to her curiosity when he'd walked away. As she adjusted his IV and checked his vital signs, Marcus stirred slightly. For a moment she thought he might wake up, and she felt a stab of panic. What would she say to him? What could she possibly say? But he remained unconscious, and Sarah told herself she was relieved. It was nearly dawn when Rebecca found her sitting in the break room, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "Long night," Rebecca said, settling into the chair across from her. "You've been quiet. Everything okay at home? How's Emma?" Sarah managed to smile. Rebecca always asked about Emma, and Sarah appreciated it. Most people at work knew she was a single mother, but Rebecca was one of the few who seemed to understand what that really meant. The constant juggling act, the worry, the weight of being everything to someone else. "She's fine. Staying at my neighbor's while I work nights." Sarah took a sip of the cold coffee and made a face. "Rebecca, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Have you ever had to treat someone you knew? Someone from your past?" Rebecca's expression grew thoughtful. "Once, an old boyfriend came in after a motorcycle accident. It was strange, all that history suddenly present in the room while I'm trying to be clinical and professional.
She paused. "Why do you ask?" Sarah hesitated. She'd never told anyone at work about her father, about the abandonment that had shaped so much of her life. It felt too personal, too raw, even after all these years. "No reason. Just curious." Rebecca studied her face with the same attention she paid to patients. "Sarah, if something's bothering you, you know you can talk to me, right? We've worked together long enough that I hope you consider me more than just a colleague." "I do. Thank you." Sarah stood up, suddenly needing the move. "I should check on the cardiac patient from earlier." "Mr. Thompson? His condition has been stable all night. Dr. Patel will be taking over his care during the day shift." Sarah nodded, but she found herself walking toward the cardiac unit anyway. She told herself she was just being thorough, making sure the night's work was properly documented. She told herself her reasons were professional. She stood outside Marcus's room for a long time before going in. He looked smaller in the hospital bed, diminished in a way that made her think of how her own mortality would catch up with everyone eventually. The monitors beeped steadily, reassuring in their rhythm. Sarah checked his chart, noted his vitals, and was about to leave when she noticed his personal effects bag on the bedside table. Before she could stop herself, she was looking through it. His wallet contained the usual things: credit cards, a few $20 bills, business cards. But tucked behind his driver's license was a photograph that made Sarah's breath catch. It was a picture of her as a child, maybe 6 years old, standing in front of their old apartment building. She was smiling at the camera, gap-toothed and happy, wearing a dress her mother had sewn from fabric remnants. The photograph was worn around the edges, as if it had been handled often. Sarah stared at it, her hands shaking. Why would he keep this? Why would he carry my picture for 22 years if he'd never cared enough to come back? "Excuse me, are you his nurse?" Sarah spun around, shoving the photograph back into the wallet. A woman stood in the doorway, late 30s, professionally dressed despite the early hour, with kind eyes and an anxious expression. "Yes," Sarah managed. "I'm Sarah. Are you family?" "I'm Jennifer, his—" "Well, it's complicated." She stepped into the room, her gaze moving to Marcus with obvious concern. "I'm his girlfriend. We've been together for 8 years. The neighbor who found him called me." Girlfriend. Sarah felt something twist in her chest. Of course he had a girlfriend. He'd probably had several over the years, maybe other families he'd walked away from too. "How is he?" Jennifer asked. "Stable, but serious. He had a significant heart attack. Are you listed as his emergency contact?" Jennifer nodded. "The doctor said someone would talk to me about his condition, but everything's been so chaotic." She trailed off, looking lost. Sarah studied her face with the same attention she paid to patients. "Dr. Patel will be in soon to discuss his treatment plan. He's getting excellent care." "Thank you." Jennifer moved closer to the bed, reaching out to touch Marcus's hand. "I keep thinking about our last conversation. We had an argument about something stupid. I can't even remember what now. I never thought—" She looked up at Sarah. "Do you think he can hear us?" "Some patients report remembering voices from when they're unconscious." "It can't hurt to talk to him." Jennifer nodded and began speaking softly to Marcus, telling him about their cat, about how worried she'd been, about how she was sorry for the argument. Her voice was gentle, loving. Sarah watched this display of affection for the man who'd abandoned her and felt something crumble inside her chest. He'd been capable of love all along. He just chose not to love her. The plot thickens. Marcus kept Sarah's photo, and he has a girlfriend who clearly loves him. Sarah's simple narrative of abandonment becomes more complex.
Sarah's shift ended at 7 a.m., but she found herself reluctant to leave the hospital. She changed out of her scrub slowly, her mind churning with questions she didn't want to ask and answers she wasn't sure she wanted to know.
The drive home to her small apartment in Logan Square usually helped her decompress, but today the familiar route felt surreal. Everything looked the same. The corner bodega where she bought Emma's school supplies, the park where they fed ducks on weekends, the tree-lined streets that had become their world. But something fundamental had shifted. Her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, met her at the door with Emma already dressed for school and clutching her backpack. "Mommy!" Emma launched herself into Sarah's arms with the enthusiasm that made every difficult moment worthwhile. "Mrs. Rodriguez made pancakes with faces." "That sounds wonderful, baby." Sarah buried her face in her daughter's hair, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and innocence. "Did you brush your teeth?" "Yes, and I packed my library book for reading time." Emma was practically bouncing with 7-year-old energy. "Can we go to the zoo this weekend? Jessie from my class went and saw real lions." "We'll see, sweetheart." Sarah's standard response to requests that required money she didn't have. Emma was used to "we'll see." It was the soundtrack of their lives. After dropping Emma at school, Sarah returned to her apartment and tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't quiet. She kept seeing Marcus's face, kept thinking about the worn photograph in his wallet, kept wondering about Jennifer and their 8-year relationship. Finally, she gave up on sleep and decided to do something she'd avoided for years. She pulled out her old laptop and opened a browser, then typed Marcus Thompson, Chicago into the search engine. The results surprised her. Marcus wasn't just surviving, he was apparently thriving. His LinkedIn profile showed he was a supervisor at a construction company, with a professional headshot that made him look successful and confident. There are mentions of him in various community newsletters, volunteering at a literacy program, coaching youth basketball. This wasn't the picture of a man who walked away from responsibility. This was someone who gave back to his community, who helped other people's children learn to read and play sports. The cognitive dissonance made her head ache. She dug deeper, finding social media profiles that showed Marcus at company barbecues, at Cubs games with Jennifer, at what looked like family gatherings with people Sarah didn't recognize. He looked happy in the photos, settled in a way that suggested he'd found peace with his life choices. But the photograph that stopped her scrolling was from 2 years ago, Marcus at a cemetery, kneeling beside a headstone. The caption read, "Visiting Maria on what would have been our 25-year anniversary. Still miss you every day." Maria. Her mother's name. She stared at the screen until her eyes burned. Her mother had died 3 years ago from complications related to diabetes, a long, difficult decline that Sarah had navigated mostly alone. She tried to find Marcus then, thinking Emma deserved to know she had a grandfather, thinking maybe her mother would want to see him one last time. But all her searches had led nowhere. Now she discovered he'd been visiting her mother's grave. He knew Maria was dead. He knew, and he'd grieved her. And he'd never reached out to Sarah. The anger that hit her was clean and bright, cutting through the confusion of the past day. How dare he grieve her mother when he'd abandoned them both? How dare he visit her grave while ignoring the daughter who'd held Maria's hand as she died? Sarah slammed the laptop shut and paced to the window. Outside, Logan Square bustled with its usual mix of young professionals, families, and long-time residents who'd watched the neighborhood transform around them. Normal people living normal lives, untroubled by ghosts and complicated histories. Her phone rang, interrupting her spiral of anger. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen. "Sarah? I hope I didn't wake you?" "No, I couldn't sleep anyway. What's up?" "It's about Mr. Thompson. He regained consciousness about an hour ago, and he's been asking about the nurse who took care of him last night. He seems quite insistent about speaking with you. I told him you'd worked nights and were probably sleeping. But," Rebecca paused, "he seems agitated when we can't give him specific information about you. It's unusual behavior for a cardiac patient." Sarah's heart began to race. "Did he say why he wanted to speak to me?" "No, just that it was important." "Sarah, is there something I should know? You've been acting strange since we treated him, and now this?" Sarah closed her eyes. She couldn't keep lying, not to Rebecca, not when it might affect patient care. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something, but I need you to promise it won't affect Mr. Thompson's treatment. Of course. What is it? Sarah took a deep breath. Marcus Thompson is my father. He left when I was 7 years old, and I haven't seen him since 22 years. Last night was the first time I've laid eyes on him in 22 years. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. Rebecca? I'm here. Jesus, Sarah, that explains a lot about last night. Another pause. Are you okay? This must be incredibly difficult. I don't know what I am, but if he's asking to see me, maybe I should go in. He might remember me from last night. You don't have to do this. I can tell him the nurse who treated him isn't available. Sarah considered this. It would be easier, cleaner. She could go back to her life and let Marcus Thompson recover or not without her involvement. But something about the photograph in his wallet, about his visits to her mother's grave, had planted questions she couldn't ignore. No, she said finally. I'll come in. But, Rebecca, I need you to be there when I talk to him. I don't think I can handle this alone. Of course. Sarah, whatever happened between you two, you saved his life last night. Remember that. After hanging up, Sarah stood in her small living room and tried to imagine the conversation she was about to have. 22 years of silence, of wondering, of anger and abandonment, condensed into whatever words they could find in a hospital room. She changed back into clean scrubs and drove to the hospital, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles went white. The afternoon shift was just beginning, and the emergency department had its usual controlled chaos, a familiar environment that usually made her feel capable and confident. Today, it felt like walking into a minefield. Rebecca met her at the elevator bank, her expression mixing professional concern with personal worry. He's been stable all day but increasingly agitated about seeing you. Jennifer, his girlfriend, is with him. She seems lovely, by the way. I met her briefly this morning. Sarah pushed the elevator button with more force than necessary. Rebecca, what do I say to him? I don't know. But Sarah, whatever you decide to tell him or not tell him, you don't owe him anything. You understand that, right? You saved his life. You've already given him more than he had any right to expect. The elevator doors opened, and they rode to the cardiac unit in silence. Outside Marcus's room, I could hear voices. Jennifer's gentle murmur and a deeper voice that made my stomach clench with recognition and memory. Ready? Rebecca asked. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Rebecca knocked and opened the door, and suddenly Sarah was face to face with her father for the first time in 22 years. He was sitting up in bed looking pale but alert. His eyes found hers immediately, and Sarah watched as recognition dawned in his expression, not the vague familiarity of a patient remembering their nurse, but the sharp, specific recognition of a father seeing his child. Sarah. Her name on his lips was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of decades.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The silence in the room was deafening. Jennifer looked between Sarah and Marcus with growing confusion, clearly sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. Rebecca positioned herself near the door, close enough to intervene but far enough to give them privacy. You know each other? Jennifer asked finally. Marcus never took his eyes off Sarah. Jennifer, this is Sarah. She's my daughter. Jennifer's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at Sarah again, this time searching for resemblances she'd missed before. Your daughter? But Marcus, you said you didn't have any children. You said you... I lied. Marcus's voice was hoarse, whether from emotion or the breathing tube he had earlier, Sarah couldn't tell. I have a daughter. Had a daughter. I don't know what tense to use anymore. Sarah found her voice, though it came out harder than she'd intended. Had is probably accurate. You forfeited the present tense 22 years ago. Jennifer stood up abruptly. I think I should give you some privacy. No,
Sarah said quickly. "Don't leave on my account. This isn't a family reunion." But Jennifer was already gathering her purse, her movements awkward with shock. "I'll be in the cafeteria," she said to Marcus. "We'll talk later." After Jennifer left, the room felt both too small and too vast. Sarah remained standing near the door while Marcus studied her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You became a nurse?" he said finally. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't act like you know anything about my life. Don't act like you have any right to be proud or interested or whatever expression that is on your face." Marcus flinched as if she'd slapped him. "You're right. I don't have any right to anything." "But Sarah, I need you to know." "What? What do you need me to know?" The words came out in a rush, 22 years of hurt and anger finally finding their target. "That you're sorry? That you had your reasons? That you thought about me sometimes while you were building your new life?" "All of that?" "None of that. I don't know. I need you to know that leaving you and your mother was the worst mistake of my life." "Mistake?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A mistake is forgetting to buy milk or taking a wrong turn. You made a choice. Every day, for 22 years, you made the choice not to come back." "You're right." The simple agreement deflated some of her anger. She had expected excuses, justifications, the kind of elaborate explanations that would give her something concrete to hate. "I was 24 years old. I was scared and stupid, and I convinced myself that you and Maria would be better off without me. I told myself I was doing the noble thing, getting out of the way so you could have a real father someday." "We didn't want a real father. We wanted you." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah hadn't meant to say that, hadn't meant to reveal how much his absence had mattered. "I know that now. I knew it then, if I'm being honest. But knowing something and being brave enough to do something about it aren't the same thing." Sarah moved closer to the bed and studied his face. "I found your social media. I know about the volunteering, the coaching. I know you visit Mom's grave." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "She was a good woman, a better person than I ever was. When I heard she died," he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, "I wanted to come to the funeral, but I didn't think I had the right. I didn't think you'd want me there." "I looked for you," Sarah said quietly. "When Mom got sick, I tried to find you. I thought maybe Emma should know her grandfather. Thought maybe Mom would want to see you one last time." "Emma?" "My daughter. Your granddaughter. She's 7. The information hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at Sarah with an expression she couldn't read. Pain, wonder, regret, all mixed together. 7, he repeated. "The same age you were when I left." "Yes." "What's she like?" Sarah almost didn't answer. Some protective instinct warned her against sharing Emma with this man who'd proven himself capable of walking away. But something in his expression, hunger maybe, or desperate curiosity, made her relent slightly. "She's smart. Funny. She wants to be a veterinarian or an astronaut, or both. She asks about her grandfather sometimes." Marcus closed his eyes. "What do you tell her?" "That he lives far away. That's kinder than I deserve." They sat in silence for a moment. Sarah could hear the normal sounds of the hospital around them, monitors beeping, conversations in the hallway, the elevator doors opening and closing. Normal sounds of life continuing while their world rearranged itself. "Sarah," Marcus said finally, "I need to tell you something else. Something you need to know. About why I left." Something in his tone made Sarah look up sharply. "What?" Marcus seemed to struggle with how to begin. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't just leave to buy cigarettes that night. I left because I'd made a terrible mistake, and I thought if I stayed, I'd destroy our family completely." Sarah felt a familiar dread settling in her stomach. What kind of mistake? I've been gambling. Not just a little. Seriously, compulsively. I owed money to people who don't accept late payments. Dangerous people. They came to the apartment that day while you were at school and your mother was at work. They had made it clear that my debt was becoming your family's debt. So you left us alone with them? No, God, no. I left because I paid them. I cleaned out our savings account, took a loan against your college fund, cashed in everything we had, but it still wasn't enough. They wanted more, and the only thing I could offer them was to disappear. They wanted me gone as much as I wanted them away from you and Maria.
You're lying. I'm not. Sarah, I swear on your mother's grave I'm not lying. I left because staying would have gotten all of us hurt or killed. Sarah felt the room spinning. This wasn't the story she'd carried for 22 years. This wasn't the narrative of selfish abandonment she'd used to fuel her anger and her independence. Even if that's true, she said slowly, you could have come back later. You could have explained. You could have called or written or something. I tried. For the first year, I called every few months, but Maria always hung up when she heard my voice. I sent letters, but they came back unopened. Eventually, I realized that maybe clean breaks were better than constant reminders of what I'd destroyed. Sarah remembered those phone calls, her mother's face going white when she answered, the way Maria would slam down the receiver and disappear into her bedroom for hours afterward. She remembered finding unopened letters in the trash once and being too scared to ask about them. But you kept my picture. I kept your picture. I kept track of you both from a distance. I knew when you graduated high school, when you went to nursing school, when you got married. Marcus paused. I knew when you got divorced and when Emma was born. I've been following your life from the shadows for 22 years. The revelation was too much. Sarah felt her legs give out, and she sank into the chair Jennifer had vacated. You've been stalking us? Not stalking, just watching. Making sure you were okay. Making sure my leaving had actually protected you instead of just causing more damage. This is insane. Sarah put her head in her hands. This is completely insane. Sarah, Rebecca's voice came from near the door. His heart rate is climbing. Maybe we should take a break. But Marcus was struggling to sit up further, his eyes locked on Sarah with desperate intensity. There's more. Something else you need to know. Something about why I'm here. Why I had the heart attack. Sarah looked up. What are you talking about? It wasn't random, Sarah. I didn't just happen to have a heart attack in my apartment. I had it here, in this hospital. I was in the parking lot trying to work up the courage to come inside and find you. The biggest twist yet, Marcus didn't just have a random heart attack. He came to the hospital looking for Sarah, and the massive revelation about his gambling debts and dangerous people completely reframes his abandonment.
The monitors in Marcus's room began beeping more rapidly, and Rebecca moved quickly to his side, checking his pulse and examining the readings. Mr. Thompson, you need to calm down. Your heart rate is dangerously elevated. But Marcus ignored her, his eyes still fixed on Sarah. I came to find you. I'd been planning it for months, ever since your mother died. I knew I was running out of time to make things right. Sarah felt like she was drowning in information she didn't know how to process. Running out of time? What does that mean? Rebecca frowned, adjusting Marcus's oxygen levels. Mr. Thompson, you need to rest. This conversation can wait. No, it can't. Marcus's voice was getting stronger, not weaker, despite the alarming readings on his monitors. Sarah, I'm sick. Not just the heart attack. That was brought on by stress and anxiety about seeing you. I have pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors gave me 3 to 6 months, and that was 2 months ago. The room went completely silent, except for the steadily beeping monitors. Sarah stared at her father, trying to process this final piece of information that seemed to recontextualize everything that had come before. Cancer, she repeated numbly. I know how this sounds. I know it looks like I'm only reaching out because I'm dying, and maybe that's partly true. But Sarah, I have wanted to contact you every day for 22 years. The cancer just finally gave me the courage to stop being a coward. Rebecca was studying Marcus's chart with a frown. Mr. Thompson, there's no mention of cancer in your medical history. Your oncologist should have been contacted when you were admitted. I don't have an oncologist anymore. I stopped treatment 6 weeks ago. You stopped treatment? Why would you do that? Marcus managed a weak smile. Because fighting cancer costs money, and dying with dignity costs less. Because I'd rather spend what time I have left trying to make amends than lying in a hospital bed getting sicker from chemotherapy. This is ridiculous. Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, Chicago stretched endlessly in all directions. Millions of people living their uncomplicated lives. You can't just decide to die because it's convenient for your narrative. That's not what I'm doing. Isn't it? Sarah spun around to face him. You show up here with a heart attack and cancer and a sob story about protecting us from loan sharks. It's all very dramatic and tragic, but it doesn't change the fact that you left a 7-year-old girl wondering what she did wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. I know that now, but I didn't know it then. Do you have any idea what it's like to grow up thinking your father left because you weren't good enough? Because you weren't worth staying for? Marcus's face crumpled. No, I don't. And I can never make up for that. But Sarah, I need you to know that leaving you was like cutting off my own arm. There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't regret it. Then why didn't you come back? Even after the danger passed, even after you got your life together, why didn't you come back? Because I was ashamed. Because every year that passed made it harder to explain why I'd stayed away. Because I convinced myself you were better off without me, and by the time I realized how selfish that was, it felt too late. Sarah sank back into the chair, emotionally exhausted. It was too late. It's still too late. Maybe, but I had to try. Marcus's voice was getting weaker now, the emotional toll of their conversation evident in his vital signs. Sarah, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to play happy families or introduce me to Emma or pretend the last 22 years didn't happen. I just needed you to know the truth about why I left, and I needed to tell you that not a single day has passed that I haven't thought about you. Rebecca moved closer to Sarah. I think that's enough for today. His condition is stabilizing, but he needs rest. Sarah nodded, though she felt anything but ready to leave. There were still so many questions, so many pieces that didn't quite fit together. But Marcus's eyes were closing, and the monitors were showing signs that his body was demanding the rest his mind had been fighting. I'll be back tomorrow, Sarah heard herself say, surprising everyone in the room, including herself. Marcus's eyes opened slightly. You will? I need to verify your story. About the gambling, about the people you owed money to, about Mom knowing. If you're lying to me again, I'm not lying. Check with Detective Rodriguez at the 14th District. He handled my case back there. Or talk to Father Martinez at St. Pius. He helped me get into Gamblers Anonymous after I left. Sarah made mental notes of the names. And the cancer? Dr. Patricia Williams at Rush Medical Center. She can verify everything. Sarah stood up, her legs still unsteady. This doesn't change anything between us. I'm not suddenly going to become your daughter again just because you're dying. I know. And I'm not bringing Emma into this mess. I wouldn't ask you to." Sarah moved toward the door, then stopped. "Why nursing?" "What?" "You said you followed my life in a distance. You knew I became a nurse. I'm wondering if that influenced your decision at all, knowing I'd be the one taking care of you if something happened." Marcus was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he'd fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I had a heart attack 2 years ago. Minor one, but it scared me. I started researching cardiac care in Chicago, looking at different hospitals, different units. When I saw your name listed on Chicago Memorial's website as part of the emergency nursing staff, You chose this hospital because I work here. I chose this hospital because if something happened to me, I wanted the last face I saw to be someone who shared my blood, even if she hated me. That's manipulative. Maybe, probably. I'm not proud of it, but yes, that's why I moved to this part of the city. That's why I was in the parking lot last night, instead of at Northwestern or Rush. Sarah didn't trust herself to respond. She left the room without saying goodbye, Rebecca following close behind. In the hallway, Rebecca caught her arm gently. "Sarah, are you okay?" "No, I don't think I'll ever be okay again." Sarah leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. "How do I verify if he's telling the truth about the cancer? Patient confidentiality laws." "He can sign a release allowing Dr. Williams to speak with you. I can arrange that." Rebecca was studying Sarah's face carefully. "Do you want me to be there when you make those calls? This is a lot to process alone." "I have to pick up Emma in 2 hours. I have to make dinner and help with homework and pretend that my entire understanding of my life has just been turned upside down." "Sarah, you don't have to pretend anything. Emma's smart. She'll sense something's wrong anyway. Maybe it's time to tell her the truth about her grandfather." "No, I won't expose her to this. She's 7 years old, Rebecca. She doesn't need to know that her grandfather is a dying stranger who abandoned her family." "But what if he's telling the truth? What if he really was trying to protect you?" "Then he's a coward who chose the easy way out instead of trusting his family enough to face the problem together." Sarah pushed herself away from the wall. "I need to go home." But as she walked toward the elevator, Sarah found herself thinking about the photograph in Marcus's wallet, worn from handling. She thought about him visiting her mother's grave, about him following her life in a distance, about him choosing this hospital because she worked here. Maybe cowardice and love weren't mutually exclusive. Sarah's world has been completely turned upside down, but she's still resistant to forgiveness. The revelation that Marcus chose this hospital because she worked here adds another layer of complexity to his motivations.
The next morning, Sarah found herself sitting in her car outside St. Pius Church, staring at the modest brick building where Marcus claimed to have found help for his gambling addiction. She dropped Emma at school with the kind of distracted goodbye that made her daughter ask 3 times if everything was okay. Everything was not okay, but Sarah was determined to find out exactly how not okay it was. Father Martinez turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 60s, with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent decades listening to people's worst confessions. He met Sarah in his office, which was cluttered with books, photographs of parishioners, and the comfortable disorder of a man who prioritized people over organization. "Marcus Thompson," he repeated when Sarah introduced herself and explained why she'd come. "Yes, I remember Marcus. He came to us 23 years ago, in terrible shape. Gambling addiction had cost him everything, his family, his savings, nearly his life. He told me he owed money to dangerous people." Father Martinez nodded gravely. "That's true. Marcus was in very real physical danger.
The men he owed money to had made it clear that his debt would be paid one way or another, and if he couldn't pay it, his family would. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. So he really was protecting us by leaving. In the short term, yes, but there were other options, other ways to handle the situation. Marcus chose the option that required the least courage, running away instead of facing the problem with the support of people who loved him. Did he ever talk about wanting to go back to his family? Father Martinez was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing his words carefully. Sarah, I'm going to tell you something that might be difficult to hear, but you deserve the truth. Marcus never stopped talking about going back. For the first 5 years, it was all he talked about. He'd make plans, work up the courage, even drive to your neighborhood sometimes. But he always lost his nerve. Why? Fear. Shame. The longer he stayed away, the harder it became to imagine explaining himself. He convinced himself that your lives were better without him, that his return would only cause more pain. Sarah leaned back in her chair, processing this information. Father, can I ask you something else? He says he has cancer now, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Yes, I know about the diagnosis. Marcus stopped coming to our support group meetings about 3 months ago because he was too weak from treatment. When he told me he was stopping chemotherapy, I tried to convince him to reconsider. Why did he stop? He said he'd rather spend his remaining time trying to make amends than fighting a losing battle with medical bills. Sarah closed her eyes. Every piece of Marcus's story was checking out, which somehow made everything worse instead of better. It would have been easier if he'd been lying, if she could dismiss him as a manipulative stranger using illness to gain sympathy. Father Martinez, do you think he's genuinely sorry, or is this just deathbed guilt? The priest considered this carefully. In my experience, people facing death don't suddenly become different than they were in life. They just become more intensely themselves. Marcus has been carrying guilt and regret for 23 years. The cancer didn't create those feelings. It just gave him the courage to finally act on them. Sarah left the church with more questions than answers. Her next stop was the 14th District Police Station, where Detective Rodriguez, now Captain Rodriguez, confirmed Marcus's story about the gambling debts and the threats against his family. Thompson was small-time compared to some of the cases we dealt with, but the people he owed money to weren't small-time at all. They made it clear that his family was at risk. When he disappeared, the threats stopped. We assumed he'd either paid up or they'd killed him quietly. He was protecting us, Sarah said, more to herself than to the captain. In his way, yes, but there were other options. Witness protection, police protection, while we built a case against the loan sharks. Thompson chose the option that let him handle it alone instead of trusting the system or his family. The final stop was Rush Medical Center, where Dr. Patricia Williams reviewed Marcus's medical records after he'd signed the release form that Rebecca had arranged. The diagnosis was exactly as Marcus had described, stage 4 pancreatic cancer with a prognosis of 3 to 6 months from initial diagnosis. Mr. Thompson stopped treatment against my strong recommendation. He said he had other priorities for his remaining time. I see this sometimes with terminal patients. They reach a point where quality of life becomes more important than quantity. Is there any chance he could recover with treatment? Dr. Williams shook her head. The cancer is too advanced. Treatment might extend his life by a few weeks, possibly a month or 2, but it would be very difficult on his body. I can't say I blame him for choosing to spend his time differently.
By the time Sarah picked up Emma from school, she had verified every aspect of Marcus's story. The gambling addiction, the dangerous debts, the threats against his family, the cancer diagnosis. It was all true. Her father hadn't abandoned them out of selfishness or indifference. He'd left to protect them, then stayed away out of cowardice and shame. The knowledge didn't make her feel better. If anything, it made everything more complicated. "Mama, you look sad," Emma observed as they walked home from school. "Are you sick?" "No, baby. Just thinking about work stuff." "Is someone at the hospital very sick?" Sarah looked down at her daughter, 7 years old, the same age Sarah had been when Marcus left, Emma had the same dark eyes that Sarah remembered seeing in the mirror as a child. The same stubborn chin that had gotten Sarah through nursing school and single motherhood. "Yes," Sarah said finally. "Someone at the hospital is very sick." "Are you taking good care of them?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. Was she taking good care of Marcus? She'd saved his life, verified his story, but she hadn't forgiven him. She wasn't sure she could forgive him. "I'm trying to, sweetheart." "That's what you always do. You take good care of everyone." That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and her laptop, reading about pancreatic cancer survival rates and treatment options. She found herself on memorial websites, reading tributes to people who died from the same disease that was killing her father. Many of the tributes mentioned final reconciliations, family members who'd put aside old grievances to spend precious time with their dying loved ones. The stories made Sarah feel selfish and petty for holding on to her anger. But they also made her realize something else. She was allowed to be angry. Marcus's reasons for leaving might have been noble, but the result had been 22 years of abandonment. His reasons for staying away might have been understandable, but the result had been a childhood spent wondering why her father didn't love her enough to come back. Good intentions didn't erase the consequences of his choices. Her phone rang, interrupting her brooding. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen. "Sarah, I'm sorry to call so late, but I thought you'd want to know. Marcus's condition took a turn for the worse this evening. His heart rate became irregular, and we've had to move him to the intensive care unit." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "How bad is it?" "Serious. The stress of yesterday's conversation, combined with his underlying cancer, has put significant strain on his cardiovascular system. Sarah, if you want to see him again, you should probably come in soon." After hanging up, Sarah sat in her dark kitchen for a long time. Part of her wanted to stay home and let Marcus Thompson die as he had lived for the past 22 years. Without her, it would be poetic justice of a sort. But another part of her, the part that had become a nurse because she believed in healing and second chances, knew she couldn't live with that choice. She called Mrs. Rodriguez to watch Emma, then drove through the quiet Chicago night toward the hospital where her father was dying. All of Marcus's claims have been verified as true, making Sarah's anger more complicated. Now he's dying faster than expected, forcing her to make a decision about forgiveness while she still can.
The ICU at Chicago Memorial was a place Sarah knew well, but tonight it felt different walking through as a visitor rather than a nurse. The controlled chaos of critical care, monitors beeping, ventilators humming, nurses moving with urgent purpose, usually energized her. Tonight it felt overwhelming. Marcus was in room 314, connected to more machines than she'd seen him with before. His breathing was labored, despite the oxygen mask, and his skin had taken on that grayish pallor that Sarah had learned to recognize as the body beginning to shut down. Jennifer was there, slumped in the visitor's chair with red-rimmed eyes and clothes that suggested she'd been at the hospital all day. She looked up when Sarah entered, managing a weak smile. "Hi, I wasn't sure if you'd come back." Neither was I. Sarah moved closer to the bed, automatically checking the monitors and IV lines with a nurse's trained eye. "How long has he been like this?" "Since about 6 o'clock. The doctors said the stress of seeing you yesterday probably triggered the cardiac event, but that the cancer would have caused similar complications soon anyway." Jennifer wiped her eyes. "They said his heart is just too weak to keep fighting." Sarah felt a stab of guilt. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have pushed him so hard yesterday." "No, don't say that. He's been wanting to see you for so long. Even if this is what happens because of it, he got what he wanted most." Jennifer looked at Marcus's unconscious face with obvious love. "He talked about you all the time, you know. I have 8 years of stories about his daughter the nurse, his brilliant daughter who saved people's lives." "He talked about me?" "Constantly. He knew when you graduated nursing school, when you got your emergency certification, when you won that award last year for patient advocacy.
He was so proud of you, Sarah, so proud and so ashamed that he couldn't tell you himself. Sarah sank into the other visitor's chair, overwhelmed. How did he know all of that? He had ways of finding out. Friends of friends, social media, public records. Sometimes I think he knew more about your life than I knew about his. Jennifer managed a laugh. He used to joke that he was your most dedicated stalker. That's not funny. No, I guess it isn't. But Sarah, you have to understand. Missing you was like a chronic illness for him. It never went away, never got better, just became something he learned to live with. They sat in silence for a while, watching Marcus breathe. Sarah found herself studying his face, looking for the father she remembered in the dying stranger he'd become. The bone structure was the same, the way his hair grew, the shape of his hands, but 22 years had changed him in ways that went beyond physical aging. Jennifer, can I ask you something? Did he ever try to contact me before now? Letters, phone calls, anything? Jennifer hesitated. Promise me you won't be angry? I can't promise that. He sent you birthday cards every year, and Christmas cards. For 22 years, he wrote you birthday cards and Christmas cards and letters apologizing and explaining, but he never sent them. He has boxes of them in his apartment, hundreds of letters he wrote to you and never mailed. Hundreds of letters? He wrote to you when he was missing you especially hard, when he saw little girls who reminded of you, when he had good news he wanted to share, when he was sick or scared. He wrote you letters about everything. His job, his relationship with me, his diagnosis, his regrets. But he never had the courage to send them. Where are these letters now? In his apartment. He gave me the key last week and asked me to make sure you got them if something happened to him. Jennifer reached into her purse and pulled out a small silver key. He said they might help you understand who he became after he left, even if they couldn't excuse who he was when he left. Sarah took the key with trembling hands. The idea of reading 22 years of her father's thoughts, his unshared love and regret, was almost too much to contemplate. Marcus stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open. When he saw Sarah, he tried to speak, but the oxygen mask made it difficult. Sarah moved closer to the bed. Don't try to talk. Save your strength. But Marcus was struggling to remove the mask, his movements weak but determined. Sarah looked at Jennifer, who nodded. The doctor has said there's nothing more they can do. He's not getting better, Sarah. This is it. Sarah helped Marcus adjust the oxygen mask so he could speak. His voice was barely a whisper, but his eyes were alert and focused on her face. Sarah, you came back. I'm here. I need to tell you about Emma, your daughter. Sarah's blood went cold. What about Emma? I've seen her. Not talked to her, just seen her. The playground near your apartment. I watched her play sometimes from my car. She looks like you did at that age. You've been watching my daughter? Sarah's voice was sharp with alarm and anger. Not like that. Never approached her. Never. I just wanted to see her. To see what I was missing. Jennifer reached over and took Sarah's hand. He showed me pictures he took from a distance. He wasn't being creepy or dangerous. He was just trying to be part of her life the only way he knew how.
That's not okay, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. She thought about all the times she'd taken Emma to that playground, all the moments of normal childhood that Marcus had witnessed from afar. The sadness of it was almost unbearable. I know, Marcus whispered. I know it's not okay. Nothing I've done has been okay. But Sarah, she's beautiful. She's perfect. And watching her, it was like getting to see you grow up all over again. Sarah felt tears starting, and this time she didn't try to stop them. You missed it, Dad. You missed all of it. My childhood, my graduation, my wedding, Emma's birth, Mom's death. You missed everything that mattered. I know. Marcus's own tears were flowing freely now. I know what I lost. I've known every day for 22 years. Then why didn't you come back?
If you knew what you were missing, if you were watching us from a distance anyway, why didn't you just come back?" Marcus closed his eyes, gathering strength for what might be his last explanation. "Because I thought you hated me. Because I thought you were better off without a father who had proven he couldn't be trusted to stay. Because every year that passed made it harder to explain why I'd stayed away so long." He opened his eyes and looked directly at Sarah. "Because I was a coward. And cowards don't change just because time passes." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I did hate you. For years, I hated you so much it felt like poison in my veins." "I know. But I also loved you. Even when I hated you, I loved you. Do you understand how confusing that was for a child?" "Yes, because I felt the same way about myself." The monitors around Marcus's bed began showing more irregular patterns. His breathing was becoming more labored, and Sarah could see that he was weakening rapidly. "Sarah," he whispered urgently, "I need you to know that you turned out better than I ever deserved. You're a good mother, a good nurse, a good person. Everything you accomplished, you did without me, and I'm more proud of that than I have any right to be. Dad, tell Emma about me someday. Not the men who left, but maybe some of the good parts too. Tell her that her grandfather loved her from a distance and that he was sorry he never got to meet her." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "And Sarah, forgive yourself for whatever anger you still feel toward me. You don't owe me forgiveness, but you owe yourself peace." Marcus closed his eyes then, his breathing becoming shallower. Sarah took his hand, the first time she'd touched her father in 22 years, and held it while his life ebbed away. He died 20 minutes later, with Sarah holding one hand and Jennifer holding the other, surrounded by the mechanical sounds of a hospital trying to keep people alive.
3 days later, Sarah stood outside Marcus Thompson's apartment building in Pilsen, holding the key Jennifer had given her. It was the same neighborhood where she'd grown up, only a few blocks from the apartment where Marcus had lived with her and her mother all those years ago. Jennifer had offered to come with her, but Sarah had declined. This was something she needed to do alone. The apartment was small and tidy, with the kind of impersonal cleanliness that suggested its occupant had been preparing for the end. But it was the living room that took Sarah's breath away. One entire wall was covered with photographs, pictures of Sarah from childhood through adulthood, printed from social media or taken from a distance. Pictures of her at her high school graduation, her nursing school pinning ceremony, her wedding. Pictures of Emma at various ages, playing at the playground, walking to school, laughing with friends. It was like walking into a shrine to the life he'd missed. In the corner of the room sat a large wooden chest. Sarah opened it with trembling hands and found herself looking at hundreds of envelopes, all addressed to her in Marcus's handwriting. They were organized chronologically, starting with her 8th birthday, a year after he'd left. Sarah picked up the first envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a birthday card with a picture of a little girl blowing out candles, and a letter written in Marcus's careful script. "My dearest Sarah, today you turn 8 years old, and I'm not there to see it. I wonder if you had a party, if your mother made you a cake, if you made a wish when you blew out the candles. I hope you did, and I hope all your wishes come true. I want you to know that, even though I'm not with you, I think about you every single day. I wonder if you've lost any more teeth, if you still like to read stories about animals, if you remember the song I used to sing to put you to sleep. I made a terrible mistake leaving you and your mother, but I thought I was protecting you. Now I think I was just protecting myself from having to be brave. I was supposed to be the grown-up, supposed to figure out how to keep our family safe without running away. I failed at that, and I'm sorry. I hope someday you'll understand that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done, and that staying away gets harder every day, not easier. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Dad."
Sarah sank into Marcus's armchair, clutching the letter. She pulled out another envelope, this one from her 16th birthday. My beautiful daughter, you're 16 today. I saw you walking to school last week. I know I shouldn't watch you, but I can't seem to stop myself. And you looked so grown up. You were laughing with your friends, and for a moment you looked exactly like your mother did when I first met her. I wonder if you're dating anyone, if you're thinking about college, if you still want to be a veterinarian like you used to say when you were little. I hope you're happy. I hope you know how special you are. Your mother is raising you to be strong and independent, which is good because I proved that the men in your life can't always be counted on to stay. But I want you to know that not all men are like me. Someday you'll find someone who will love you the way you deserve to be loved, and who will have the courage to fight for that love, instead of running away from it. I'm proud of the young woman you're becoming, even though I have no right to be proud. Everything good about you comes from your mother and your own strength, not from me. I love you always, Dad. Sarah spent hours reading through the letters, watching her life unfold through her father's eyes. He wrote about her graduation from nursing school, her wedding, her divorce, Emma's birth. He wrote about his own life too, his work, his relationship with Jennifer, his cancer diagnosis, his grief over her mother's death. Her phone rang, Emma's school, reminding her about the parent-teacher conference she'd forgotten. Real life calling her back from this strange journey through her father's secret devotion. But as she prepared to leave Marcus's apartment, Sarah made a decision. She gathered up all the letters and photographs, loading them into the boxes Jennifer had left for her. She would take them home, read them all slowly, and maybe someday share some of them with Emma. She also took one photograph, a picture of Marcus holding her as a toddler, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. It was evidence that once, before everything went wrong, they had been happy together. 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself standing in Graceland Cemetery next to her mother's grave. The headstone was simple, black granite with Maria Santos Martinez engraved in clear letters. Someone had recently left fresh flowers, white lilies that Marcus had probably brought before his heart attack. Sarah knelt down and placed her own flowers, yellow roses that had been her mother's favorites. "Hi, Mom," she said quietly. "I met Dad. It's complicated." The cemetery was peaceful in the late afternoon light, with families of ducks paddling in the nearby lagoon and joggers following the paths between the sections. It was a good place for difficult conversations. "He told me about the gambling, about the man who threatened us. I verified it all. He was telling the truth. He really did leave to protect us." Sarah adjusted the roses, giving her hands something to do while she processed her thoughts. "But Mom, he stayed away because he was scared. For 22 years he chose his fear over our family." A breeze rustled the trees overhead, and Sarah found herself thinking about forgiveness, about the difference between understanding someone's actions and excusing them. "I found all the letters he wrote me, hundreds of them, over 22 years. He loved me, Mom. He loved me the whole time, but he was too much of a coward to do anything about it." Sarah wiped away tears that had started falling. "I'm angry about that. I'm angry that he wasted so much time, that he robbed us of so many years together, but I'm also sad for him, because he suffered too. He punished himself for 22 years. Sarah stood up, brushing dirt up her knees. "I don't know if I forgive him yet. Maybe forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. Maybe it's something you choose to work toward, one day at a time." She walked back to her car, but instead of driving straight home, she found herself heading toward the playground where Marcus used to watch Emma. It was after school time, and the playground was full of children Emma's age, running and laughing and living their uncomplicated lives. Sarah sat on a bench and pulled out her phone, scrolling through the pictures she'd taken of Emma over the years. In some of them, she could see traces of Marcus, the shape of Emma's hands, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, the stubborn set of her jaw when she was determined about something.
Emma would grow up knowing her grandfather only through stories and letters, which was tragic but not uncommon. Lots of children grew up without grandparents. The difference was that Emma would know her grandfather had loved her from a distance, had watched her grow up, and been proud of her, even if he never had the courage to introduce himself. That was something, at least. When Sarah got home, Emma was at the kitchen table doing homework, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration, the way it always did when she was working hard. "Hi, baby. How was school?" "Good. We learned about family trees and social studies. Mrs. Patterson said we need to interview family members for a project." Emma looked up hopefully. "Can you tell me stories about my grandparents?" Sarah sat down across from her daughter, thinking about the boxes of letters and photographs now stored in her bedroom closet, waiting for the right time to be shared. "Yes," she said finally. "I can tell you about your grandparents. Your grandmother was one of the strongest, kindest people I've ever known. And your grandfather—" Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "Your grandfather loved you very much, even though he lived far away and you never got to meet him." "What was he like?" Sarah thought about Marcus watching Emma from his car, about 22 years of birthday cards never sent, about a dying man's regret and love and cowardice. He was complicated. He made some big mistakes in his life, but he never stopped loving his family. He was proud of you, Emma, even though he never got to tell you that himself. He was very proud of you. "Do you think he would have liked me if I met him?" "Oh, sweetheart." Sarah reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "He already did like you. He loved you more than you'll ever know." That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat in her bedroom reading more of Marcus's letters. Some made her cry, some made her angry, and some made her laugh despite everything. They were the record of a love that was too afraid of itself to exist in the open, but too strong to disappear entirely. Sarah thought about the nurse practitioner program Rebecca kept encouraging her to consider. She thought about the life Marcus had missed and the light that Emma still had ahead of her. She thought about forgiveness and second chances and the difference between understanding and excusing. Then she opened her laptop and began filling out the application for graduate school. It was time to stop letting fear make her decisions for her. Marcus Thompson had spent 22 years loving his family from a distance, too afraid to step into the light and claim his place in their lives. Sarah Martinez would not make the same mistake. She would love boldly, live courageously, and teach her daughter that family meant showing up, even when it was scary, even when you weren't sure you were good enough, even when staying might hurt more than leaving. The next morning, Sarah stopped by the hospital before her shift started and found Rebecca in the break room. "I've been thinking about the nurse practitioner program," Sarah said without preamble. Rebecca looked up from her coffee with surprise and hope. "And?" "I've submitted my application last night. If I get in, will you write me a recommendation letter?" Rebecca's face broke into a huge smile. "Sarah, this is wonderful. What changed your mind?" Sarah thought about how to answer that question. She could talk about Marcus, about the letters, about learning that love wasn't always enough if you didn't have the courage to act on it. She could explain about forgiveness and second chances and the weight of regret. Instead, she said simply, "I realized I was letting fear make my decisions for me. I don't want to do that anymore." "Well, whatever prompted it, I'm proud of you. Your patients are going to benefit from having someone with your compassion and insight in an advanced role." As Sarah started her shift that night, she thought about the cardiac patient who changed everything, the father who died with her forgiveness still in question. She thought about Emma, sleeping peacefully at home, loved and protected, but not sheltered from the complexity of real life.
She thought about the future, graduate school, career advancement, the possibility of a life bigger than the one she'd been afraid to reach for. And maybe, eventually, she thought about forgiveness. Not the kind that excused or forgot, but the kind that released both the forgiver and the forgiven from the weight of the past. The kind that acknowledged that love and failure could exist in the same person, that good intentions didn't erase harmful actions, but that understanding could coexist with accountability.
Marcus Thompson had spent 22 years loving his daughter from the shadows, too afraid to step into the light. It was a tragedy of cowardice and regret, but it was also a love story. Imperfect, painful, and real. Sarah Martinez had learned that some stories don't have clean endings, that some reconciliations happen too late, and that sometimes the most important conversations are the ones we have with ourselves about what we're willing to carry and what we're finally ready to put down. But she also learned that it's never too late to be brave, never too late to choose love over fear, never too late to become the person you were meant to be all along. In the end, that might be the most important lesson of all.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.